Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
And today's episode, this is our first episode in almost 3 months, I think, that we don't have a guest today, that it's just you and I.
And it's also our first episode in our
swag.
T-shirts. Yeah, in our swag.
Yes. So we are testing these t-shirts out. Like I said, I'm not as thrilled with the fabric of these shirts.
It's sturdy though. It's not like the really cheap thin stuff. It is that.
It is that, but it's almost too stiff. However, it was a great way we can show off our logo on the front. So it says the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, which if you follow us on any of our social medias or whatever, this is what you see. And it says podcast. And then the back, okay, I can't tell. So you have to tell me, can we see it?
You're good. Perfect. So, it says, for every death had a life and every life had a story. The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery podcast.
So for those of you who are viewing us, and actually I'll try and maybe post like we'll do like a screenshot or something that we can put on social media. Let us know what you guys think. Is this something you guys want? If, merch wise, do you want your shirts to look like this? Should we do something different? I know I keep trying to adjust my camera so it shows more of it, but yeah, we really do like being able to wear them and represent our show. But I know we've had listeners who have asked about it, and so we're working on it. I promise.
No, Jenny made a special trip down from Denver to Colorado Springs so I can have the shirt for the trip. So it was nice, and I did get to wear it.
Well, I'm glad, because it was totally worth that trip just so that you would be able to wear it on your trip. So if you remember, well, last week you were with us. You joined us last week with our guest. Mm-hmm. But the week before you were on your trip, you had just left when I was recording that episode. So you had gone out there. Initially, it was Rhode Island, and then you guys expanded on the trip. But you were there with your daughter for an oddities.
Yeah, so she invited me. Yeah, she invited me to help her on oddities and curiosity expos that she does. They have shows all over the country. It's like Comic-Con, but for more of the morbid and
witchy goth-like stuff.
Yes. And there's so much stuff. There is a lot of really, really cool stuff. And so she just asked me to go work with her. I've never done this before. This is our first solo trip together that we were together nonstop for over a week. And it was a flippin' blast. It was, going through TSA and we had like 7 suitcases.
Okay, that's a lot.
Like the big ones, like, you can stick a body in and that had all of her stuff in it. And
I didn't think about that she can't travel light when she's trying to sell her stuff. So
yeah, and TSA does not like cast iron cauldron candles.
Oh.
So those got checked. So I don't know what she's gonna, I don't know if she's gonna thought we were gonna throw them at people on the plane or not. But
and just so our listeners know, she has a physical location in Manitou Springs, correct? They have the Heart and Horn shop.
A shop. Yeah, she has a shop. She does have a shop on Etsy and Shopify. She doesn't have like a shop actually you could go into, but most of her stuff is on the shows, and her name is Hart, Hart, and Horn, Horn.
I love the name of her shop. So we'll link it in our show notes. So if anybody's interested, she's got teas and candles and all kinds of stuff.
It's handmade witch fashion accessories and products. I had to ask her exactly how to say this. So and she has the most amazing witch hats.
Yes, I was looking at her hats. I'm tempted.
Yeah, they are really nice hats, and I'm not just saying that because she's my daughter.
No, they're gorgeous. So we'll make sure we link the Etsy shop in there. She's also got an Instagram account, so you can totally check out her stuff on Instagram too. Yeah, it's great. So, but in addition to working the Oddity show, which was awesome that you did that, but you guys took time to do some actual sightseeing once you'd done the show.
Yeah, because we went in. She made it a vacation. So usually it's a quick turnaround weekend. Yeah. So we got into Providence on Wednesday nights. We had all day Thursday, and we walked around a bit. Granted, this was during the heat wave, so it was like
Yeah.
almost 100 degrees and 300% humidity. Well, it wasn't that exaggerated, but we walked. We didn't want to, Uber everywhere, and we didn't get very far because of the humidity. But we went up into Providence and got to see like the first Baptist church from
Oh, cool.
1646, and just being and sitting there and looking at these places that the patriots are at and the colonists were at. It was incredible. And we found the cutest little Irish pub in Providence. It's called Murphy. So if anybody's over by the convention center, it is awesome. We were treated like queens. They got to know us.
Oh,
They took really, really good care of us.
I love that.
Yeah.
When we went to Providence, we really were only there for a few hours. We went there a couple of years ago specifically to see the Broadway show Waitress, because I didn't get a chance to see it when it was in Denver, and then we were taking that trip and it happened to be there.
Perfect. Yeah.
So that's the only reason we had gone to Providence. So I didn't get to see like all the other stuff that Providence offers. And we did eat in Providence, but it was at a little like sandwich shop right next to the theaters. Like we were afraid to get too far away from our theater and then get lost. So we kind of stuck to the area.
We ventured out on the last night there at night, and it was not a really good idea to do that because there are some areas that you should not be out by yourself at night.
Probably.
So we hurried and got our body back to the thing. But what was cool, there were several Civil War memorials there.
Fun.
Statues and that, because we don't have that in Colorado. And what's the other thing about Providence that was so cool? It was just fun being back there. Oh, and then Friday we went to Fall River,
Massachusetts.
Yes. So Friday we went to Fall River, Massachusetts, to see this lovely house built in the 1840s and most famous for being the home of Lizzie Borden. We had an amazing tour. It was so well done. And
their tour guides there are awesome.
I was so impressed.
At the Lizzie Borden house. They are, if you've never been able to go on that tour, if you're in Fall River, they have the best tour guides. I will agree with you. Like ours, when we did it, she was so amazing. She knew her stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew all kinds of other little stories and tidbits that she was able to share. And she just made the whole thing super entertaining and interesting.
Yeah, because we had a gentleman, and then how he told the story it was, because sometimes you go on tours and they could be like, you get bored after a while, or because of all the audience. And it was so interesting. And he did such an amazing job. It was, definitely a tour guide to look up to and try to be as good as he was. And then,
and I don't know, did they let you, so like our group, when we did it, we got to, our guide, would take us to the different rooms and talk about what went on in those rooms and show us the pictures. And, we went through the whole gory story of the murders and everything that took place in that house. But she would talk about some of just the way the Victorians lived, like in addition to their story. It was kind of like, this was what society was doing at the time, and this was what was going on in town at the time, which I loved. And then we had time to like take pictures and slowly kind of walk through, and she would wait to start in the next room until everybody had their chance to see what they wanted to see. And so we didn't feel rushed, even though it was a timed tour or whatever. We didn't ever, or at least I never felt like we were rushed through that tour. Mm-mm. So, and
then Angela also paid for the basement tour.
Oh yeah.
So we got to go downstairs. That was like a separate tour. And it's interesting. I don't know how much you pay for it. I'll just say, I don't know if it was a lot of money, if I would pay for it.
No, it's not that much extra, but
it's
creepy.
It is creepy.
It is creepy.
And then there's Max. Is it Max the cat that's supposed to haunt the house?
I think so.
Yeah. But, and then we went, and I was so disappointed because I have a family letter from like 1878 that is an address that's very close to the house. So I asked them, so where's this house? We were just going to walk and see if we can find it. And they're like, are you going to drive? I said, no, we're walking. Oh, no, you're not going to do that. And so I'm like, well, poo. And so I just walked across the street to the Catholic church, which was where her maid went to church, Lizzie's,
Right.
and apparently I almost walked into a drug deal. 'Cause I'm not paying attention. I'm just looking at cool stuff. Angela's having a heart attack.
I can just picture her being like, Mom, get back here.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, she did. She went and got me and turned me, and we didn't realize that when we were leaving Providence that we were very lucky to get an Uber back from Fall River because they do not pick up in Fall River. So we actually were very lucky we got home that night.
Huh. I did not know that. Well, we rented a car, so we had parked and
Yeah, exactly. You
walked,
weren't,
but
yeah. So like I said, we Ubered. And then of course Saturday and Sunday was the show, which was a lot of fun. And then Monday we left and went to Salem. Yeah, we went to Salem, and then Monday, Tuesday. I'm trying to think. I'm not trying to. Yeah, and then Aaron, my son, was going to come up, right? Or is it down from New York? Go up from New York on Tuesday and meet us, but he surprised me a day earlier.
I love
And then
that.
he came and hung out. We stayed at the Hawthorne. Is that the name of it? In Salem?
The Hawthorne Hotel right there in downtown Salem.
Yeah, it was fun. We went out, we walked, and then the next day we went and did all the touristy stuff in Salem and went to the wharf. And it's just being on the wharf and knowing it was there from the 1600s. It actually, because when we went back to New York in November, I was so impressed with the age and the history of New York. And it's like we're standing there in the wharf for predated New York. And it's like, it's so incredible, the history back there. And then, oh yeah, that Monday, then we went up to Ipswich.
Yep. And you got to meet with Rachel
Oh
from
my God,
Epic
that was
Preservation, who was on our show not too long ago and told us her story.
And what was so exciting about that is because before I met my husband, I became infatuated with these beautiful slate headstones that I first saw in South Carolina. And it so happened there was a John Hartshorn who was a stone carver from the 1600s. Little long did I know I was going to marry a descendant of that said Hartshorn. And so to have the kids there, for them to actually stand in front of one of his stones that he carved.
Oh, cool.
Was just so amazing. And I just looked up real quick. It's like he actually, let's see, he served in King Philip's. He was in King Philip's War. He was one of the last surviving members of that war. And he did not start stone carving until the age of 50. And he did it all the way up until his 80s.
So for 30 years, but he started late in life.
Started late. And it's funny, I told Tom, I go, see, you could start over. He was a weaver and then he became a stone carver. And he's like, I'm not going to carve stones. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying.
The point is, you're never too old to learn something new.
Exactly. So, because then when I first met Rachel of Epic Preservation, she asked me, she goes, are you this Hartshorn? I said, no, I'm not, but my husband is.
You are by marriage. I mean,
well, by marriage, but my kids are.
Yeah.
So, so he took the train up from Salem to Ipswich, and then we just walked. So I was texting Rachel the whole time. I go, we're walking from the station. I didn't know she was driving around looking for us.
Oh,
so we saw the cemetery up on the hill. Google Maps, going by first period houses, not first century, first period houses. Just Ipswich is so beautiful because it's not as touristy as Salem is. Right. It's like you really are walking back in time. And then I'm walking across the street and you come up to Old North Burying Ground and it goes up a hill. And I'm like walking and I'm not even paying attention to cars or anything because it was just so cool. And Rachel was right there. She's, oh my God, I've been looking for you. She had cold water for us and everything. And then, so we met her business partner, Josh, and then they gave the kids a tour, all of us a tour. I wandered, they did their thing. And then we went and had clams with them. I've been told you had to eat the fried clams in Ipswich. So we went out to dinner with Rachel and Josh, and it was a lot of fun.
And if folks are currently watching us on YouTube, if you look behind Dianne right now, that is Old North Burial Ground in Ipswich. So that was the burial ground you guys were wandering through, and that is very near and dear to Rachel and Josh's hearts because they've done a lot of preservation work in that particular cemetery.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the hill. Oh,
And
this is the hill I first saw when I saw it.
yeah, that's one of my favorite things about a lot of the cemeteries back there especially in Massachusetts. Like so many of them are up on those hills like that.
Yeah.
And and then when you get up to the top of the hill and you look out and you can see the view of the town or sometimes water or, what, depending on where they're located. I love the hill, the cemetery on the hill.
Yeah. And they've been doing
gorgeous.
it for 7 years. And so they showed us some of their work and stuff. So it was just a lot of fun because, a lot of times we don't get to meet our guests or even
in
people
person. I know
on the internet. So it's like, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then,
and to see her work and Josh's, we're both Rachel and Josh, to see their work in person and not just the photographs that we've seen. That's cool. And see
that was really, really cool. And then the next day it was pretty much all Salem. And I'm sure Aaron was witched out. It's really not his thing, but he went along with us joyfully. And Salem is cool. I know why you like it so much. It's just very touristy and
and I think it's become more touristy in the last few years than it used to be originally. It's a big part of their economy now.
Of course,
the tourism definitely supports their economy. But I think what I like about it, a lot of people go because they like the spooky stuff, the witchy stuff, the Halloween stuff in October, especially. But there's so much more history to Salem than just the witch trials. Exactly. Not that they aren't important. They're very important. Right. As a descendant of people that were hanged, very important. But all the literary history that's there, all the shipping history that's there.
Yes.
That is a wealth of stuff that a lot of people don't realize is there until they've been there. And until you start taking the historical tours and reading and of course, and we've talked about this before. Anytime I go on a trip, I bring back books. Yeah. And more books. And so it was after, I think, my very first trip when I brought back books and I really started reading. And then it just dawned on me how much of our history as a country is really in Salem beyond the witch trials.
Oh, but it's almost, I don't want to say started there, but like this, because we went to the wharf and there's a sign there. I think there's one house from the 1600s and then the customs house was behind. And it was like reading this is like, because Salem Harbor isn't as shallow, so to speak, for the big ships. So then they went up to Boston and down to New York. And it's like, and I pictured as we were walking, because we walked all the way out and then on the wharf to the end of the wharf and then came back. It's like, and I'm picturing all these rich captains coming off their ships and with their whatever they have with them and the cargo being lifted and then going to customs and then going through all the customs stuff and just the rich.
And that customs house is so beautiful. I've still never been inside of it. I've never been there when it's been opened up where you can go inside it. But the outside of it, I can just imagine because it looks right over the wharf. And at one time, the wharf was actually further inland than it is now. It went all the way up to, and I don't have a map to show you guys, but there's a street in Salem called Front Street. And that is named because that was the original waterfront. And eventually that became landfill because they needed to expand to create more space for the humans.
Sort of like what they did in Louisiana, in New Orleans. They built it up. Okay.
So they built it up and so the original street, the original waterfront, went a little further inland than where it's at currently. But yeah, just imagining those ships with their cargo coming in and the one thing you had mentioned that you loved, and it's all over the place back east, is the houses will have the little signs on them that tell you who built the house and who lived there. And I always love that, even if we don't know much more about that person, the fact that we know it was Captain so-and-so built this house in 1802. And you just are like, it lends itself to these gorgeous images in your head of what was going on at that time.
Well, and some of the other ones, like the 1600s, the 1700s, it is, and it's like, wow, even the kids who, well, Angela likes history, but even Aaron, who really isn't into history, all that, it was like, wow, I keep saying wow, but it was like, it was just so cool to be there in that.
Oh, yeah.
In that spot. And you're right about Salem because and we went to the Witch Museum, which there have been reviews. We saw reviews that say it's really hokey, it's out of date, da 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 da. But it's of its time. I think it was built in the 60s or 70s. And
70s.
it was actually, if you think about it, it's simple. It's not like a production. I think how they did the stories and the voicing and how they told the story through the models, I'm gonna say wax models.
I would say they're like panoramas almost.
Panoramas, but
That's
it was very well done and it was very concise and you really got a feeling of what happened.
And then the second half of the tour where they expand upon how witchcraft has changed over, and what witching and how things, the stuff through Hollywood and the Wiccan religion. I really like that part of it because it shows you how we've gone from persecuting people for witches to now they're just part of our society. So, and I like that change. And that's something that if you do some of the other witch tours, like there's the wax museum and there's another witch museum in town. It really just sticks to the witch trial stories, which is fine. It's important to learn it, but it doesn't go beyond that part like the witch museum itself does, which is what I really kind of like about and I love the witch museum's gift shop.
Oh, they have an amazing gift shop.
They have one of the best gift shops. Them and the House of Seven Gables have some of the best gift shops in town.
Yes. And the country's oldest candy store is, I think, right there.
Did you guys go?
Yeah, of course we went. It was a candy store. And we bought something. I can't remember. It was one of the old candies.
Was it the Blackjacks? Was it the long?
Yes.
Those are my favorite.
The ginger ones. Yeah, they were actually pretty good.
We get them every time we go.
Yeah. And it was like, but with the witch thing, I don't want to say that it's almost cartoonish in some things, where it's sort of you miss, especially since you and I did what 3 or 4.
I did 3 episodes about the witch trials. We split it up.
That it sort of has taken away the seriousness and the tragedy of the original sentencing innocent people. I don't even say witch trials, sentencing innocent people to death. And then it's had nothing to do with witches, but Salem's all about witches. So yeah, I just think, like I said, there's a lot of people that miss out on some of the other really cool parts of Salem and its history. The other, you were talking about the architecture in town, how you have the different houses and the different, that's something else I really like. So the Peabody Essex, which is their big museum there in town, and they own a lot of the historical houses, and they have different tours of different ones and stuff like that. And one of the things that I think they've done really well is helping to preserve that architecture from the different centuries, so that, and as modern Americans and modern tourists, because they get a lot of tourists from other countries all over the world,
you get a chance to see how architecture has changed, how technology changed things. That's again one of my favorite parts of touring the House of Seven Gables is they go through, and I don't know if you guys did that tour.
No, we went to it, but we didn't go on the tour. But we did do the witch house, which has nothing to do with witches.
No, it's just
the only surviving house from the time period of the witch trial, which is Aaron and I did it. I was like, okay, you got to have one thing that's not witchy. So we went through it, and I think he just did it to humor me. But they do have corpse powder in there, which was interesting. But it was
and they have poppets and stuff too.
Yeah, and they had poppets and they had some etching and stuff, but it's so simple. It had, like I said, nothing to do with witches. So, but you got to walk on these wooden floors that were 300 years old. It's like, oh.
Well, and that's, so the House of Seven Gables, their historical tour, they start you out in the kitchen area, which is part of the original house, which was built in the 1600s. So it still has the giant fireplace that was used for heating and cooking and all the things they use the fireplaces for. But it goes, as you take the tour, you can see how it changed. And they talk about how gables were added and taken away and added and taken away over the years and all the changes. But what's so cool is it gives you a really good example of how architecture changed from century to century and how in wealthy families, especially what got taken out. what was popular, paint colors, wallpaper, all the things that happened. And that's, again, a piece of history that especially across the East Coast, you're going to have that anyway in any of those towns from the 16 and 1700s. But it's been so well preserved at that particular location that it's a very important part of our history. And that's one of the things I love about being able to take that particular tour. And nothing to do with witches on that tour, other than they mentioned Nathaniel Hawthorne, who did write the Scarlet Letter and the book, The House of Seven Gables, obviously. And that book does talk about the witches, sort of, not in the same context if you've ever read it.
It's not like the whole.
No.
Yeah, it's not like Hocus Pocus.
But, Hawthorne also is a descendant of one of the persecutors, and he was not impressed by his ancestor at all.
Right. So we talked about him. I don't say we talked about him in another episode.
Why he added an E to his last name to change that spelling because he didn't want that association with the judge. But you did get to visit Charter Street Cemetery.
Oh my gosh, yeah, because we went the first evening. It was like 5 o'clock and the gates were already closed. And we're like, well, this is weird, And then because the Witch Memorial is there too. And it was built in 1992. But the way that I was so impressed. I mean, when you see pictures of it, it looks like it would be bigger. When you see it in person, it's like small. I thought it was going to be a big thing, right?
No, it's not that. I mean, it's as wide as the cemetery is right there.
Right. And we're just sort of looking at these rocks. And I'm like, oh, this is the Witch Memorial. That wasn't marked or anything, but it's so well done that it blends so well into the I don't want to say the style, but it blends so well into the other environment with the Charter Street Cemetery that whoever designed that memorial it's amazing how they did it and incorporated the rocks into the wall and
the stone benches with each victim's name and an execution date on them.
Yeah, it was really cool. Oh, that was the other thing we ran into, because somehow I found that there might be a connection to Rebecca Nurse, again, to my husband's side, and who was one of the victims of the witch trials. And we were in the museum, and there was a lady who had this T-shirt on and said, "Descendant of Rebecca Nurse, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, oh my God, where'd you get the T-shirt? And then we were talking, and a little bit. And then the next day, was it the next day or later that day, we ran into them at the cemetery too. So we went back the next day to Charter Street Cemetery. We had breakfast at Red's, because it's right across the street. And I wanted to have breakfast there because it was originally old.
It was an old coffee house.
Coffee house, but it said the Patriots, basically had breakfast there and planned the revolution. I'm terribly paraphrasing, but
that's a good way to put it. There were so they were planning the revolution in that building.
Yeah, because I even asked them. They go, "Where would you like to sit?" I go, "I want to sit in the oldest part." So there's only a couple tables left, so we sat there, and that was fun.
Yeah, because they're usually pretty busy. So
yeah, it's like great breakfast, good place to eat if you're in Salem. And then we went over to Charter Street, and my daughter had visited Salem about 10 years ago, and you could just wander everywhere. Now there's just paths through the cemetery. You can't get off the paths to go look at any of the other stones. So you're really limited to what you can see, which is really sad. But apparently they've had a lot of vandalism and people sitting on the stones, standing on the stones, not standing, well, could be standing, stealing the stones. So they have somebody watching the gate at the front, and then somebody inside watching everybody who's there, which is so sad that they have to do that.
Unfortunately, I just think the popularity of Salem now made that necessary for that, especially for that particular cemetery, because of where it's located. It is located right in downtown. It's right across from the Peabody Essex, like you said, over by Red's, which is a very popular eatery. Right behind the Wax Museum is on one side of it. So like people are there, and it just, to protect the stones, as old as these stones are, because they do date back to the 1690s. And a little earlier in some cases.
Yeah, before
Yeah.
we put even a country, and it's just it's really sad that
Well, and of
it's not
course, Judge
respected.
Hawthorne Stone is located in that cemetery, and this is over decades, not just within the last few
Right.
years, but like decades, that poor stone has been vandalized over and over because it's his stone and because he's perceived as, the super bad guy in the
Right.
trials and everything. And so his stone, and his is one of the ones that's encased. I should show you.
Mhm.
Um, you have the Mayflower one
I had the
that's
Mayflower
in that
one.
same cemetery. So the cool
Which
thing
I
about
have.
Charter Street Cemetery, and I think we've mentioned it before, but there is a passenger from the Mayflower who is buried in that cemetery. I believe he is the only passenger from the Mayflower that we actually know that this is his actual gravesite. And you
Oh,
can see how they encased his stone
yep.
in this other case to preserve
Protected.
it. Because most of the Mayflower passengers, their actual graves were unmarked. But because he left the Plymouth area and was in Salem by the time he died,
Mhm.
they marked his grave. So it's the one that we do know where he was when he died, and he's actually buried in that part of the cemetery, which I think is so cool because we've been to Plymouth and we've been to the old cemetery in Plymouth, and there are grave markers for passengers from the Mayflower there, but that doesn't mean they're actually buried. They may not even be buried in that cemetery. They may just have markers there, because a lot of those first
Okay.
ones
Yeah.
they didn't mark the graves. Um,
Right. Because it wasn't a. I don't even think it was a thing. And then you just put rocks.
well, part of it was because it was in England, but they didn't necessarily have the stone yet here, and
Right.
they didn't bring stone carvers with them because
Right.
they weren't thinking along those lines when they were coming. And another part of it was because of the conflicts with the Native Americans at the time, they didn't want their grave sites disturbed either. So there was those two reasons. So that's why this is the only gentleman we know from the Mayflower exactly where his grave is located. And I don't remember his name. I was trying to look at it. Richard Moore.
I,
There we
yeah.
go.
Yeah. And it was like
And he just missed out on the whole witch trial thing by a year.
so
he,
that's
he
the
died
thing
right
too.
before it all started.
So, we were there and Aaron asked, he goes, so what was the big importance about the pilgrims? Why do we remember the pilgrims, even though there was already explorers and people, not to mention that, of course, the Native Americans were here first, but the other people who came over, maybe just they didn't stay. So it's like, oh, that's a really good question. Why do we remember the
Because
pilgrims?
they were one of the first successful
Yeah,
colonies to be
settlements
able
that,
to, yeah, because there were some other earlier ones and they weren't successful. So this was one of the very first
yeah.
successful ones.
And I don't, and weren't the other ones more exploring too than
Yeah,
just having to,
because this is one where they brought men and women
right?
to settle and to actually start families and to, create the farms and all of that. And I mean, it wasn't 100% successful. They still had a lot
No,
of people die that came over and stuff on that one, but it was one of the more successful settlements that
right.
actually grew and continued to exist long after they got here. So that's
What
why
was
it's
cool,
remembered.
yeah, what was cool about that though, a headstone triggered a question and a discussion about the pilgrims, which made me very happy because I really didn't think about it. Really, it's like pilgrims, Thanksgiving, this is what you do. But no, there was so much more
Right.
to it.
We can learn more of the story. And the fact that you can learn some of that story, not even in Plymouth. Like say, I mean, Salem's not that far from Plymouth, but it's more than an hour's drive. I don't remember how long
Yeah,
the drive is between the towns, but I mean, think about that. And at the time he would have left the Plymouth area to get to the Salem area. That was
right.
a trek, like to haul your household
Yeah.
goods and everything and get set up again in another location. That was quite the trek. So
And it
that's
was
very cool that you
yeah.
got to see that grave.
Yeah, I thought it was really
And
cool.
then I think the one that's behind me, I feel like this is another Charter Street one, unless that's
I
Old North Burial, but I feel
No,
like,
I think it is. I think it is Charter Street. There's one of the few I could actually get close to.
and get that lovely soul effigy, which
Yes.
I love. And I had it behind me specifically because it made me look like I have wings, but
Ah,
it's such a, the carving on this one it's so well preserved, and you can see like the feathers and the wings and the eyes. I love how big the eyes are on this one, and the waves in the hair and the smile. He's like a happy soul effigy.
exactly, because some of them are like, of course, the skeleton and the skulls and that, which
Which are older than the
which are older.
souls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then this one he is really, really happy. And then that's what was so cool about the Hartshorn headstones. He started his a little different, where they were just more like the mask. They said like the death mask, so they're not as elaborate, and his were a little
Right.
bit different. And this is another picture in Charter Street, and I loved it because of the big, huge tree and how close all the stones were. And then there was the fence and that around some of it. They're just so close and so
Well, and you can even see if you look at the tree trunk, you can see some stones that have actually kind of sunk into the ground
yeah, the
where the
tree.
tree trunk comes out. And
Yeah.
that fencing, that's actually been there a long time, but they've actually moved some of the stones because I can remember when I first went there, some of those stones were actually just leaned up against the tree. So they've kind of
Really?
relocated them and actually put them back in the ground, which again, we know that Rachel from Epic Preservation did a lot of work in this particular
Mhm.
cemetery too. So, but yes, this also gives you an idea of how these original burial grounds like this, because this was before the concept of cemetery, as in the garden cemeteries and
Right,
stuff.
exactly.
People were just kind of buried where there was space to bury them, and then they would mark them if they could mark them. But there wasn't like straight rows necessarily, like we
True.
think
And they
of
were all over the
today.
place. Yeah.
They just were like, this is our plot, this is where we're going to bury our family, and then they would put them there. And then of course over 300 years stones get shifted and moved around, they fall over these, especially when you look at how most of these, a lot of these are slate, some of them are marble,
Mhm.
but they're not very thick for one
No.
thing. And I don't know, not having done any restoration work on these older ones like this, I don't know what the bottoms look like, the bottom portion that's in the ground, but like how deep down does it go in the ground
Oh,
before,
how tall are
to
they?
hold it
Yeah.
up and stuff, which would lend to why some of those probably fall over more easily, especially if you leaned on them and stuff.
But just think though, if they were made out of limestone or even marble, we would not have them today, because we see
Mm-hmm.
what we have and how limestone disintegrates so quickly, and marble, you know,
Sugars. Yeah.
sugars, thank you. I was trying to think of another word, but sugars. And thank God these were made out of slate.
I love this. The slates are my favorite,
Yeah, Mike. Yeah.
mostly because they've just, like you said, they've held up so well. And I can't imagine carving into slate. Like it's got to be hard to carve into. And when these were designed, there were no electronic type, you
Nope.
weren't plugging in your carver. This was all a chisel and hammer type carving that they had to do. And some of them get so elaborate. And
There,
to think about having to pound on a chisel for hours at a
oh,
time
I
to get
know.
those designs or the letters, and the fact that we could still read a lot of them and know who's buried there, especially the ones, there's a few in Charter Street where they actually like detail how the person died or whatever, you think
Right.
about carving all that
But,
script into
yeah.
slate.
Oh, because then there was a church we went into, it was the Unitarian church that we went into in Providence. And I'm trying to think if it was carved, but it was interesting in that anything with a U, and maybe you've seen this back there too, the U's are all V's,
Mm-hmm.
because it's easier to do two straight lines. Is that a V?
Right, rather
Two
than a
straight
curved
lines
U.
than the U. So that was interesting. That's why some of these carvings are sometimes hard to read, because there was one we I took a picture of that the numbers were different. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
I think you know which one I'm talking about. It's like the 55 was different. They were carved way, it's almost like part of it was done beforehand. It was weird. It was definitely
Well,
very unique.
and the other thing you'll come across is S's a lot of times will look like F's, like our modern day version of
Mhm.
an F, but it's really an S. If you read it and you figure out what it says, it's an S sound. But again, I think part of that was they wrote them that way too. So if you're looking at
Right.
old like parchments and stuff that are written out, it's that way. But like on the stones, the very first time I encountered that, I was like, what does this say? And then I learned that was an S and not an F. And so I was like, oh, this makes way more sense now.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah, so
And
you come across a lot of that in those cemeteries.
and then what was it in Ipswich? That cemetery is the one of the oldest, I'm trying to find it here. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in America. And it's like, I know, it's like, it's mind blowing. I mean, especially, I mean, you've been to some really old cemeteries in your travels back east. And like I said, the first one I went to was like back in the 80s, and it was the Circular Congregational Church in Charleston. That was the last one until these. And just doing what we do and sharing these stories, it's just so important. And then to actually walk on these, for me, it's like being actually to walk on some of the places we have, and some of the places we have talked about and the people we have talked about. Because yeah, there's several people on here I would not have known about if it wasn't for Jennie and this podcast.
And then you get to have those moments. Well, you saw the one bridge that both George Washington and Lafayette went over.
Yes, it was in
So
Ipswich. Let me see if I can find the picture.
yeah, that, which again, you have that moment of George Washington, the very first president of our country,
Yep.
walked her, and they have it marked, because he was impressed by the engineering of this particular bridge. But like, to stand there and have that moment, it's just, it really helps bring history to life for a minute. It's more than just reading about it or learning about it in a classroom. Now you're standing in a spot that these two men who were very integral in our country becoming an actual country, and not just, a colony of England anymore, or France, or, depending on what part of the country you live in and what part of the history you're looking at. That's a moment. And there's so many of those moments when you're in Massachusetts and anywhere in New England, to be honest, and further south, anywhere in the South, all those along the coast there, all those states, just to have that moment of like, it gives you goosebumps.
Exactly, because when we were traveling from Providence to Salem, and it's like, notice how thick the forest are. Our forests aren't as thick here. So like all the trees that, for us poor little Colorado people, it's a big thing. And then going by the street, the highway signs that said Concord and Lexington. It's like, oh my God, I'm looking out the window going, I can see, it's like, I'm imagining the Revolutionary War soldiers, or they could actually hide in the trees there. We can't really do that here. But it's just, I was geeking out. I wasn't talking to anybody else.
To know that those forests were even thicker then than they are now. Because now, I mean, they've obviously said that population has definitely increased from now, from the 1600s and 1700s to now. Those forests were thicker. Those trees were bigger. That was one thing I learned on my last trip there. We took a tour of the Daniels house, which is in Salem. It's a bed and breakfast, but you can also take tours of it. And again, like the House of Seven Gables, it was built at different time periods and added onto. But the floorboards are really extra wide. But that's how wide those trees were that those boards would have come from, which are twice as wide as they are now in a lot of cases. I mean, most of those old trees are gone, either because we cut them down and used them to build stuff, or because they would have died out over time. But when you look at the width of some of those floorboards in those really old 300-year-old buildings that still exist, and you see how wide they are, it gives you a moment to take into perspective what people were envisioning here, what the Native Americans got to live in. When we think about, we think about them living in these forests and surviving and building their structures and stuff, just how much bigger those trees were to cut down. And they did all that by hand. It was hand carved. Again, no power tools to cut that down to these ginormous trees. They were cutting down and sanding them and planing them into boards all by hand. It was a mega job to do something like that.
Yeah, because they would have been virgin forests. And then maybe hundreds of years old, where we're lucky now we live. Oh my gosh.
So then when you read about certain historical events that happened back there, and they talk about, they were able to hide in the trees and blah, 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 it makes it even more mind-blowing in your head, because one tree might hide three guys easily, because they were so much bigger at the time than what we see now. And the forests were so much denser and crazier and scarier. And this is where you can, when they talk about, when we go back to the witch trials, and there's still speculation as to why so many girls and then later women and stuff decided to go crazy, essentially, and everybody was going crazy. One, their very strict religious beliefs were not helpful to them.
Yeah.
But two, they had a lot of superstitions. And if you're living in an area that's completely surrounded by trees and
Yeah.
wildlife that's different from wildlife in Europe,
Yeah.
and you have the Native American, I mean, think about all of those things that built on top of each other, and that lent itself to a lot of what happened during the witch trials.
Right.
That's what lent itself to a lot of the horrible tragedies that happened during King Philip's War. You know, they were fighting over that space and that land.
Mhm.
And, you know, and, but it puts it in a whole new perspective than just reading it out of your
Right.
book. This is why I loved, when we were talking with our guest last week about his trip to all of the
Yeah.
president's graves and the vice president's graves, that his parents were willing to take those trips with him
Yeah.
for his whole life, essentially. I mean, he was 8 years old,
Definitely.
but
Yeah.
they took him to these historical spots. And of course, his love of history developed, and now he's a historian. Like, that's what he does for a living. But
Yeah. And he works at a cemetery. He helps, educational projects,
at the Congressional
programs.
Cemetery.
Yeah. So
So
you
this
just
is why
never
it's,
know, right, where
yeah,
something will lead. And it's just, people really, that was the other thing. I know the second we hit the Massachusetts border, and granted, I realized it was like the week before the 4th of July, but there were so many flags and bunting. And it's like,
did they have the so I know you saw the Salem Common, because if you went to the Witch Museum and all that, you would
yeah.
have seen the Commons because it's across from there. Did they
Mhm.
have the gazebo that's there? Was it decorated? I
No,
didn't know if it would be or not for 4th of July,
not
but
yet, but I know that they had all kinds of, we saw banners and advertising for all the 4th of July festivities that they would have. So that would, you know, to be back and celebrate the 4th of July where our country started is like, and I think anybody and everybody should try to get back east, whether it's Salem, New York, Plymouth, Concord,
Boston, any of those
Boston,
places. Yeah.
and try to hit outside of the touristy, more modern stuff and actually step into and experience the history that our forefathers and foremothers, lived. Because it's just, I have such a new appreciation of what happened in this country.
It does really put a lot of things into perspective that, again, when you just read it out of a book, and not criticizing our history teachers at all,
No, not at all.
I mean, you can only do what you do in a classroom. But if you have the opportunity as an adult, if you've never done it, do it. Take your kids. I know, especially if they're a little bit older, they might roll their eyes. They might be like, ugh. But I guarantee at some point it's going to hit later in life that they went and saw these historical places and
Yeah.
had that moment to understand really where our country started.
Yeah, because like I told you before, we went to visit Ellis Island, and I only went to the
Mhm.
timeline of just immigration that started clear in the early 17, maybe even 1600s, and all the different cultures that came over here that I had no idea. And it's like, I could only do immigration because there was so much other stuff. It's like,
Right,
it's so mind blown because there's so much we did not learn. But granted, we cannot, this is like lifetime
right.
studying of
Yeah.
history.
But then to imagine, to stand there and imagine all these different cultures coming through at the same time, all
Mm-hmm.
the languages you would hear, all the clothing you would see, that's, different types of clothing, the food. And it really shows how we as Americans developed all our different things that we
Right,
do, and
exactly.
traditions is the word I'm looking for, because we
Yeah.
had so many cultures that have come from so many other parts of the world. And then we, took on certain things, like there's certain things that we all do. Like, I think every American has had some form of Italian food or some form of Mexican food at some point in their life,
Definitely.
which is not exactly going to be the same as if you go back to Italy or you go down to Mexico, but it's very similar because those cultures brought their food here. And then we are all like, this is delicious. I could live on enchiladas and green chili my whole life and I could probably eat it every day and be fine.
Hmm.
I don't. but although I did have it for lunch, I will say that was my lunch today. But
Well, it was something we were watching on, it was over the 4th of July. It was the story of us on the History Channel. And
Mm.
it's funny, it was that we got to the cities and we watched the whole thing with the Statue of Liberty, and just what a monumental task that was to get her up.
Oh, I know.
Because Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower, had to come over and do that. And because it was a gift from France for our
Mhm.
centennial. But there was saying and I can't remember the year, but there was more Italians in New York than there was in Italy.
Because so many of them had come here
Mhm.
looking to improve their life. And you know what?
Yeah,
They did
exactly.
not improve right away, unfortunately.
No,
It
there was
just, it took a long time for them to be able to integrate into American society. Eventually they did. But there's every group that comes through,
yep.
I think, experiences that at some point,
Oh
wherever
yeah,
they're
but
coming
then
from.
they had their little pockets of their community that is
Mhm.
still their thing, which is really cool about the big cities. Because I know in Providence there was an Italian area that they told us we had to go to, and there's like the line down the middle of the street is painted red and green.
Oh, cool. See,
Yeah, so it was.
I need to go back to Providence because I didn't get to see nearly enough of it when I was
Well, like I
there.
said, we were limited to what we saw, but it's the architecture back there is so ornate and so detailed. New York was fine, but it was more like streamlined, and
Mhm.
the stone houses were beautiful, but there's so many. Yeah, that was the word I could not think of when we were wandering the streets. Intricate detail on all the fronts of the buildings. It was pretty dang
And
impressive.
again, that's where that cultural influence comes in too. And this is why, like, even if you go down to Charleston, South Carolina, you're going to get something different.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in like parts of Louisiana, it's different because there's,
Oh,
depending
such a
on
mix in
which group of
Louisiana.
people were kind of
Yeah.
settled mostly in that area, the architecture changes based on who's there at the time and who's doing the building. And I think that's phenomenal. And again, stuff that we kind of take for granted, I think sometimes
Well,
in
and
our
just
everyday, you
yeah.
pass certain buildings every day or you go down certain streets every day. And even here, for things that are 200 years old or 150 years old, if we pass it often enough, it doesn't always,
It's like it blends in.
yeah, it's like we know it's there, but we don't think about it until you stop and look at it, or you go tour it, or you happen to read an article that has to
Mhm.
do with the historical value of it, whatever. But having those moments, but they happen, like you said, more frequently when you're on the East Coast.
That's
But
yeah, it is, and but it's like when you were saying about the homes that they're the there's more first period homes, like in Ipswich and Salem has those, and they have been working to preserve those homes for such a long, long time. And the Witch House is one that really impressed me in that it basically was a private residence. It was like, I think descendants owned it, and then it was a private family. So, and then it became a museum, but that they maintained it
mm-hmm.
instead of like, oh, we need to make it modern because we don't need this, that, or the other. Where we live, where Jenny and I live, so much of our history has been torn down for urban renewal. And like in the late 1860s, we almost lost the Molly Brown house, i.e., the unsinkable Margaret Brown, that person. They almost tore her house down, and so many houses at that time period because, and it's really sad that we don't value that as much as they do in other parts of the country.
Well, and I think part of it too, I blame the gold rush. I'm sure California has experienced this, parts of Montana, um, the Dakotas, anywhere where we went for gold and silver. So I blame the gold and silver rushes. That's just what it was. It was a rush. People went, they got what they could for their riches, and then they moved on. Never, and think about how many of our buildings and stuff were put up temporarily. They
Well,
were like,
yeah,
we're just going to put up this building because we need a building because we've got people, and then they'd move on. And that's why we have so many ghost towns out west because
true.
everybody moved on. And so, I mean, there's some points where the old buildings are too decrepit to save. Like the only thing you can do safe wise to be safe is to
Right,
tear it down.
exactly. But
I do think we've made more of an effort in the last probably 20, 30 years to, even if we have to tear it down, to repurpose the parts of it that we can.
mhm.
I think there's definitely a lot more people who are like, I'll take all those pieces of hardware and put them in this building, and we can reuse them here, or the windows, or whatever can be saved gets saved now.
Yeah, and that's true. Like up at Fairplay, they made a big deal about saving one of the old mines that was up there, and we went by it several times before restoration even began, and we haven't been up there since it's been completed. But it's a mill. That's what I meant to say.
Right.
A mill. And a lot of money went into that, and before other places, it just would have rotted away or become vandalized or burned down because somebody was stupid.
Fairplay has a great cemetery too. Their little cemetery. Well, it's not little; it's kind of spread out, but I love that cemetery.
Park County does really do a really good job on preserving their history, but I think we've lost so many things, and then they realize, oh, it's late, and I mean it's too late, and then now they're trying to save what's left, but
which is better than not saving any of it. So we'll take what we could get at this point.
Yeah, exactly. That is true, but I just wish they would have invested more in saving some homes, big homes that especially in Denver, and some of the ones here that got torn down too. So anyway,
every time I hear about some of the old, like especially the mansions and stuff where some really significant people lived, and then I'm like, oh, that one doesn't exist anymore because we tore it down to make room for new stuff. But that's okay. One day our new stuff will be the old stuff, and maybe somebody will appreciate our new stuff the way we appreciate all the old stuff now. So fingers crossed that happens, and they'll be like super impressed about rotary telephones and stuff. But anyway, well, this has been an absolutely lovely chat about your trip. That's what we intended today, folks. We decided we were going to talk about what Dianne was doing when she was gone, and the cemeteries and other historical sites she got to see, because we're a podcast about cemeteries, but we also include a lot of history. So we wanted to chat about the personal experience of getting to go somewhere she hadn't been yet. So
definitely. And Jenny goes almost every October, as long as
every couple of years. We go every 2 or 3 years. So, and
I've always been so envious. And then now it's just the opportunity that I get to travel. And I even asked Angela when her next trip show if she needs any help. And she has one coming up in November. It's in Kansas City, and of course, Kansas City, Missouri. So I had to look it up how close it is to Jesse James' grave.
Oh,
we drove by it when we were going out for my husband's brother's wedding. We were 9 flipping miles from that farm, and we didn't have time to stop. Needless to say, it's been a bone of contention for many years. It's 25 miles, and I resent her the link, and I'm like, just saying,
just go out there and see the grave. I get it.
I think I will like.
So thank you guys so much.
In the hospital.
Next week we will have a more regular episode with some history and some, something that pertains more to one thing rather than willy-nilly.
All kinds of things.
Yeah, I was like, sometimes it's nice to just have a little chat.
Because we haven't chatted, and it's like, it's fun that I finally got to share a part of the country that Jenny loves
so much.
And like I said, there's so many things being back there that, like I said, if it wasn't for her, I would not know about. And because she's related to Proctor, who is
John
also
Proctor.
part of the a victim of the witch trials.
He himself was hanged.
And go, oh my gosh, I saw it was at Proctor's Ledge. We drove into town. I saw that. I'm like, it just like the world became really small. And it was just really cool.
And I will be sure to link in our show notes today some of the locations we talked about, and there's websites and stuff. So I'll link it in case anybody wants to. We've showed some lovely pictures, but if you want to know more or you're planning a trip, I'll link some information in the show notes so you guys can go back and have that information. If you're going to go, Salem is gearing up for their busy time, which is October. I will say this now, if you are planning to go in October, please plan way ahead, because it's busy year round anymore, but October can definitely get busy, especially on the weekend. So make sure you look into Your transportation, a lot of times they've gotten to the point where on the weekends they ask you not to drive into town. They ask you to actually use public transportation. The trains are open.
All the
And
trains
all
are
of that,
great.
and to use ride share options, things like that, because parking is limited and we don't want to be taking up, like, the people who actually still have to live there in
Mhm.
town. We can't be parking in their parking spaces, stuff like that. So just I will give that heads up because October is crazy, and I know a lot of people want to go and experience it in October, which is great, but just really plan ahead. Don't plan to do like a drop-in thing in October in Salem, because
Right.
you will be miserable and you will not have a great time then. But if you plan ahead, you plan to wait in lines, plan to make reservations for food, plan to buy any tickets for tours way ahead of time
Right.
because they sell out real fast. All of that is stuff that if you're going to visit Salem itself in October, you just need to be aware to plan ahead. They have fabulous local tour guides there, and
Definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I would highly recommend, if you want to book tours, historical or otherwise, go with the local tour guide companies. I've always taken their tours. They are the best way to get to know. So if you're not a museum person and you don't want to go through the museums, but you still want to hear some of the history and the stories, book with those local tour guides. They know the local story. They know all the extra little stuff that is not in the
Yeah.
history books necessarily or whatever, but they've been into the museums and they've gone through documents and they've gone to all this stuff, and they've taken a lot of time to really learn the history and the fun little tidbits about Salem that aren't necessarily out there. So I highly recommend, when you're booking tours in Salem, to look at where that company is actually based,
Mhm.
because the local tour guides are your best option for a really good experience.
Yeah, there are so many coming in from out of town that they've actually had to greatly increase the price of licensing
Yeah,
to try to limit that. So definitely support the local tour guides, any of the local tours
right.
or anything. And then, like Jenny was saying about being busy, we were there on a Monday and Tuesday, and it was insane.
And you're
So
there in the
definitely,
summer. So
and we were there in the summer when it was during a heat wave.
yeah. So
Yeah,
like I said, if you're planning October, which I totally get the appeal in October,
I could see it. Yeah.
just way plan ahead. And there's stuff they do in October, like especially on the weekends, there's a festival and they have a big Halloween parade every year. There's all kinds of fun things they do. There's a lot of that stuff that I actually haven't taken part in when we go, and we've gone in October a lot. I'm there for the historical stuff, so I don't the hell. I love Halloween. Don't get me wrong; it's my favorite
Oh,
holiday. But I don't go to Salem for the Halloween stuff. I go to Salem for other stuff. So just know, if you're planning that trip in October, even end of September, I think it's still going to be a little crowded. So just plan ahead. Um, Look at transportation. One thing I love about the East Coast, everywhere I've ever been on the East Coast, public transportation is usually really good. So definitely more than we are used to back here out west, because
oh,
our
the train was incredible, and it was
I
so
love,
much
yeah,
fun.
being able to take the train everywhere is like pop on the train and you're there, and not
Yeah.
to have to sit in traffic. I'm okay with that, considering I sit in traffic all the time for my
Hmm.
actual day job. So to get on a train and know that I just need to pay attention to which stop I want to get off at,
Yep.
and then I can read a book or something in between, heaven. I
It
don't know
is.
if
It's like
regular
it's so.
commuters feel that way, but
Yeah, it was cool. That was one thing I wanted to try to do, to ride the train. Didn't know how, and then we just were able to ride the train just that short trip. And then if you go to Salem, go the 20 minutes and visit Ipswich
sure. Yeah, definitely.
because
And
it's not all
Concord is not that
touristy,
far.
right?
It's definitely worth a visit. Lexington is not far away. That's worth a visit. Like all of those little towns. Of course, we live in the West where things are spread out. Back East, you're like, oh, we can hop from here to here to here in like 20 minutes.
Mhm. It is
And
that
it's
that was the
great.
other thing too. I think we went through 3 states in half an hour. Well, that might be
Isn't that
exaggerated.
crazy?
It
Like,
is. It's way crazy.
it takes us all day just to get across our state. So if you want to go
Mhm.
from one side to the other, north, south, east, or west, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's going to take all day.
Yep.
When you're back east, you can hit 3 states, like you said, in less than an hour in some cases,
Yeah,
depending on where you're
which
at.
is really cool. But definitely visit our country's what would you say, beginnings, and actually
Yes.
take the time to I guess get off the beaten path and just see where a lot of this history was made, and just every life has a story, and then every spot has a story too. So,
And then tell us about it. Come, send us an
that
email
would be
or
fun. Yeah.
mention it on social media to us. We want to hear your story. We want to hear your stories about the stories that you find in your historical visits. So let us know.
Because that's something Jenny and I want to do someday, is to be able to travel to all these
Together.
cemeteries together. Yeah, to all these cemeteries. And yeah, it would
and talk with
a
their
goal
people
for
in
us.
person.
Yeah.
Rather than just over Zoom is great, but it would be great to be there in person and really see the graves and see what we've been learning about. So we will see everyone next week with some brand new stories.
We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCem. So OrdExtraCem. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Diane and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.